Hi, I'm Seamless. This is part one of the making of Ammunition. This is part one. I said that already, which is the arrangement and elements where we discuss and identify the individual things happening and sort of why I wrote them like this. And sort of what brought about the track and its story and that kind of thing. This is the first track, and if you listen to the actual album in sequence, actually I guess that's not true. No, it actually is true. This is the first track that was actually basically purely brand new. Glass and Back were both really old tracks, and Ruin wasn't that old, but it was still pretty old. This is the first track that has like the most modern of everything on it, and it pretty well shows. I did still kind of harken back to older works, even more recent older works. Like the entire intro is basically because of what I did on Truck Puncher for the R Silent EP. And mostly just because I didn't really know what to do to get to make an intro. I really just hate intros. I'm always terrible at them. And the few times they work, it ends up sort of being lopsided. But this track also has a lot of sound design in it that was pretty fresh for me, at least in some of the methods that I made them. Some of the sounds themselves may be pretty common for, like, you know, my kind of style, but I achieved some things that I didn't think I could with the ways that I did them. So in the beginning, we have a bunch of ARPs. These ARPs are very important. What they are is actually, this one pattern has two ARPs entirely. It's one that goes up and one that goes down. And it's going to tell me I'm playing it here. This one goes down. This one goes up. They're both harbors, and they both have their filters and such controlled so that they're kind of fading in and all that deal. And then this is a whole separate thing, ARPs, which is also a harbor, which is only in the beginning. This is two different ones for some reason. I don't know what about this. I don't know what about these are different. It's kind of weird. That's weird. That's the. So these are the same ones. But what about them is different? I really don't know. I think I start automating them in strange ways. I guess we'll cover that when we get to the sound design portion. The ARPs are important because they show up later as well. In the beginning, they're just kind of full force. You just hear them the whole time. Like the whole time, they're just always there. And then during the drop, they're there, but they're not necessarily filtered in, but their volume is cut up and down a whole bunch. So they're not there the whole time, but they're cut up every once in a while. And it has an extremely unintended effect. It made it sound like there were like strings almost cutting in. And you may have noticed this effect yourself if you ever like listen to a song outside of somebody else's headphones, like they have headphones on, you can kind of hear the song in the headphones. And then you hear what it sounds like, and it sounds in your head kind of really awesome. But then like you listen to it for real, and then you can hear everything clearly, you're just kind of like, oh. Or even better, we have all these, the sort of the style of movie, the found footage style, where we sort of deliberately make the footage look like amateur. And then in doing so, the things that are in the footage sort of look more realistic. Stuff like the Blair Witch Project, Cloverfield Chronicle, that kind of thing. Like because we don't get a good look at what's happening, it seems that much more realistic to us because we're filling in the gaps. Like our brains are sort of filling in the gaps to make that work out. So like when in the beginning, when we hear the ARPs in full force, which have we'll talk about this in the sound design, but there's shimmer on some of these, which are adding to the effect that's about to be discussed. But when we hear the full force, we were definitely on board with them being synthetic. Like they're just like, okay, it's some synth ARPs, that's whatever. But when they get cut in, especially like watch what happens like in this moment here. It sounds like the strings. It just sounds like an orchestra's kind of in the background. It sounds like I went and sampled and then chopped up an orchestra, even though this is just the ARPs. And it's because of the fact that I'm fitting them in with the volume. And because the snippets are so short, our brains sort of fill in what we expected to hear, and they also kind of blend in with the chords, the individual chords, which have their own sort of quality to them that make them feel like they're being orchestras. We'll talk about that in a second. And like that was an entirely unintended consequence of using the ARPs. I really only had the ARPs there because I wanted filler. I wanted it to be melodic background filler to the drop. And usually I'll just have an ARP in there in the background the whole time, maybe filter it over and over again. But like this particular track didn't want to breathe like that, and so this meant that the basses themselves were bigger and full enough that they kind of took up a lot of space, and that I didn't want to have a lot of extra shit behind them, but I need to have something in there. So that's why they're kind of specifically cutting it out the way they are. And it was really cool that it worked out that way. I didn't play any of that at all. It just happened that way. But now that I've done it this way, if I ever wanted to do it again on purpose, I could. That's the benefit of experimentation. So yeah, ARPs are good. Drums are also the first things that come in, and the drums are pretty straightforward. And I am high passing them to get them to be like the truck puncher intro. And then we have this leady thing. This thing was like the last addition to the track. Oh god damn it! Come on, filter open. Whatever. Anyway, it's a harmor, and like it's being filtered about to kind of get to be moved in, that kind of thing, and there's eventually some nice vibrato, that kind of stuff. This is actually, like I said, a pretty late addition to the song, to the track, and that was because the intro needed something extra. It needed more than just the ARPs, because I made the drop first, like I normally do, and I believe I made the ARPs in the drop, like before I made the progression for the intro. And so I laid out the intro like this, and there needed to be more. There needed to be more in there. You might notice also that the intro is not sort of an even. I mean, it is an even numbered length, but it's not like 4 blocks of 4. There's a block of 2, a block of 4, and then a rise. And this actually is a cue I took straight out of Truck Puncher as well. Truck Puncher had a 12-bar intro, I think, or at least a 12-bar rise or something like that. And if you think about it, you can't really think about it as being a 12-bar rise. You have to think of it as being an 8-bar rise, and then a 4-bar, like a 4-bar addition is kind of what happened. Or a 4-bar thing, and then an 8-bar rise. You compartmentalize it like that, then it suddenly becomes even again. So that's sort of what's happening here. Is there's 2 bars of what's going on there, and then two more bars of building up this thing, and then a couple more of us just hearing it like that, and then we have an actual rise. As far as the actual rise itself, this guy is interesting. This is actually some modular synthesis stuff. And I believe this is the only instance of the modular synthesis that actually ended up in this particular EP. Future EPs will be having a lot more of it. This is, I basically did the sort of the stuff that I would do with FM, sort of like citrusy style risers, and I did that with modular stuff, which we'll talk about sound design, because it's a lot of cool, it's a lot of coolness. And then we do get these chords. Is that what I wanted to do? Yeah. So these chords, initially these chords were just kind of a giant cop-out for me. This progression, the do-do thing, is actually straight up out of what I'm doing in Ruin. And for a long time this track was just that, and it was just kind of stagnating. It's a harmor with a little bit of Valhalla room in there, just kind of doing its thing. There's also a little bit of bass that's kind of in there that doesn't actually just start happening until I don't mute it. Yeah, so this is a pretty standard electro fare where you have high frequency super saw kind of thing, and then you beef it up with a bottom layer, a bit more solid bass. Like, it's kind of growliness, but it's a lot more subtle, but it's mostly there just to add sort of high frequency bass configuration. And it fills out the top chords, that kind of thing, and it works out. So the cop out, like I mentioned, is the whole do thing, and like this whole configuration. That didn't happen until after I wrote this part. Or did I do this part first? On one of these filler parts I wrote first, and the rhythm is actually fairly unique for me. That whole configuration basically changed this track into something that was actually worthwhile. Because before that, I was basically just making a remix of Ruin. So like, that arrangement helped turn this into something that's a bit more reasonable. And also this little moment. I love, because it kind of adds to that stringy nature. Which, like, I really didn't intend to be the case, but it just became that way. It has a lot to do with the reverb that I'm using, which I'll cover in sound design, but it's mostly sort of the cutting in and out thing that makes it kind of come together. So yeah, so then the first couple of basses, they're pretty much all regular kind of stuff. Like, I don't even know what this one is. Turn off sidechaining. Oh, this guy. So, yeah, I tried really hard to make like an LFO-y sort of style thing, and this is okay, I wanted to automate a Reese. So at the root note, it's just doing that, but if I play higher notes, it is faster. And this keyboard mapping is mapping itself to a couple parameters, but primarily it's mapping it to the LFO speeds that are over here. And these LFOs are controlling all the various parameters. And there's one X mod on some citruses and then one over here. And then I'm crossfading between them? Is that what this is? Or is it just level for level's sake? I have to investigate what's going on here. This looks ridiculously complicated, and it may end up being ridiculously complicated, but like all the splitting and all the stuff was experimentation and just trying to make a unique sounding sound. I was just doing stuff until stuff sounded like a thing. And but then I was also linking all its various parameters to the LFO so that it was like whatever I was doing was all together. Some of those LFOs are not in sync, but that's okay because these notes usually only show up as small things, and then they are not there long enough to be a problem. And then this dude, this guy's pretty fun. I may have made this into a how to bass. Yep, this is a lot of filter modulation, really. There's not much happening in here in terms of automation. It's just kind of that going on. And nothing in post. Oh yeah, okay, actually a lot of stuff in post. I have a separate reverb bus for some reason. And then they're going into the whole thing and then they're going out. So like that's there. Oh, I'm automating that on there. So like I'm automating the reverb level along with everything else. That's why some of them have tails and others don't. That kind of thing. And then this bass is the real fun one of the song. This guy. What really kills me about this bass is how Joe 40 it sounds. Not that it sounds exactly like some of his cooler sound design, but it does. It gets, not only does it get close enough, but it gets to a very specific place that I've gotten before, but with wildly different techniques. This particular sound utilizes like a lot of vocodecs in a way that ended up working out to make it all work the way I did. But like I did basically normal stuff, and only like minor changes of the parameters turned it into something that was very specifically this kind of sound that I tried to do by doing a lot of other shit that was seemingly unrelated. And this worked out so well without me even trying is just surprising to me. There's a lot of complicated sound design in the song. So this is actually one of the first songs on the EP that's like this. The older songs, Glass and Back, have almost nothing in terms of complexity. Like the freaking Patcher's Look complex as hell in the Back, or rather the Glass basses, but they're all the same thing. I just cloned them and made changes. And then like Ruin had some complicated sound design, but they were a bit more on the sort of reserve side of things because they were all just sort of regular Reese based, and also used the same bass from Glass. Isn't the only track that has recycled stuff though, because I'm actually this thing here that says printer style is straight out of Modulators of the Universe, so that's a lot of fun. I think that's it for the basses. Let's talk about printer style though. Printer style. That's printer style. Yep. That it's basically the one of the presets from that lead that I made in the Hardstyle track from scratch. So the drops are largely this, and then actually there's a new bass. There's a clone of the first bass that I'm layering with the first bass, it seems. Yeah, so you have bass 1 and 1B. So this bass 1B is a little bit more of a traditional version of just that regular. I have like an LFO in here, and I don't know that I'm doing any of the speed tricks to it, and which is odd because it progresses. Oh, so that explains this. So the slide notes here are because, well, even though it's being key tracked, the key tracking doesn't follow the slide notes. If I start here and slide it up, it doesn't change where the note value is, but it does change the pitch, so that means I'm able to keep it in key and aligned. Might be saying, but that's different, and you're right, it's different, but it's precisely different. It's twice, or maybe 3 times. It's even, which would not have been the case if I had actually just played that note. But that little layer there was added to make this part a little bit more interesting. Which would mute everything, hey. And then I kind of extrapolated sort of the every other note here into a turn, rather like the fillers here. It comes and goes up here, and goes down, goes up, goes down, and then I just kind of turned that into like a progression, sort of, and made that there. And this is where actually I made that progression, and then this is the progression I ended up using over here in the intro. So you see, it does also every other one, and then it does this, and then it comes up. It doesn't actually go up to the high one, I don't think. So there's still some new ones in there. And this kind of A-B configuration is pretty typical for my drops. It's you got yourself an A drop that's very bass crazy, and then you have a B drop that's a little bit more groove and rhythm and melodic centric. So we have an actual progression that's a bit more noticeable. You can just see on average there's more level for the arps to show up in there, which are the primary melodic force in this track. And then there's the breakdown, which is more just stuff. And there's this thing called singular, which I have no idea what this is. Oh. There's this. It's weird that I call it singular. This is basically just a sub, essentially. Which is weird because I'm pretty sure I high-passed it and have another sub in there somewhere. Or maybe not. But I do have this other ARP. This is ARP 5. Which is also just a harmor, and with the reverb. And there's a lot of that, a lot of harmor in this track. And that's just there to kind of add variety to the fact that, oh yeah, there's an ARP going on, but it's different. And then there's the second part. And so the way that I tend to write these is that I just copy paste it and then make variations, which you can definitely tell is what happened. Especially even here. You know, if I didn't mean everything. So this actually brings up a good point about people tend to ask me, like, how do I write these kinds of drops? And they ask the question with the idea in mind that these drops are planned, which, I mean, I guess I gave away the impression that they are planned by being like, oh, I could do this, I could do that. But, like, those are a lot more like guidelines than anything else. They're not, like, set in stone, like, plans that I have for these things. I absolutely just kind of put stuff down until it sounds all right. However, there are kinds of, like, classes of sounds that will work better at particular beats than others. For example, in the drop, as was my cop-out sound, my chords, it's pretty much exclusively last note of a loop, first note of a loop. In this case, the loop is 2 bars. So loop, loop, and that works out fine. And then there's a big fill in the middle, and there's a bigger fill at the end, and there's a bit of a variation, and then it's just that. So like that already takes away a lot of sort of like the stress of how to keep it together. Just do that. And then in the middle of that, we have like this bass that shows up. Like none of this could have been totally different. This bass could have been started there. It could have been one of these first. Like these are all the same kind of like sound designy that they're not fully classified as anything else. And what I mean by that is that like usually you have a kind of like your main bass sound and then you have a filler sound. In the case of this sound, the closest thing to a main bass sound is this first guy. What is this guy I didn't talk about? That's really all that is. Oh yeah, he's the bottom of this guy. So like this is actually the bottom of the main chords. So he's kind of a main bass too. So like you have the rhythm bass and then this bass, and then like in between those you put your sound design basses. But these guys you generally want to have like on the beats, on the main beginning. So like in the beginning there's that, and then it switches to the other main bass. And in the beginning there's this, and holds until there's a sound design bass. And like the cuts and the size that I did for these areas, these sections or whatever, all was just whatever. I was just kind of like, okay, this sounds all right. And then you make variations, and then you change, like you clone it, and then you change it around, and you clone it, and you change it around, and you just do that until it sounds right. Eventually, you'll do that enough times that you'll sort of start to have patterns that you know work, which can be good, it can be bad, because then you start to fall into a rut, and you might try to do something different. Like, for example, this whole thing. This is actually like, for as simple as a thing as that is a pretty big departure from how I typically tend to handle these. Like the kind of like offbeat fill. Like, I don't do that. Oh look, here's me trying to be the R silent again. Where I have a cut, but I put this little sub hit there. Which has this weird, like, because of that being there, and then the sound right before it. We get this strange feeling that there's kind of like piano reverb, that there was a piano in there, but there was nothing like a piano in there. Funny how that works out. And then the even bigger version. Those happen to be very specific little miracles that worked out to make this track work. But even if I didn't do that, even just having the regular cop out would have been kind of fine. It wouldn't have been amazing, but it would have been fine. And arriving at this is really just a case of like, I listen to every second of it. See, here's something that's cool about humans, is that we're really good at detecting when something that should be is not. And sort of what I mean by that is we're really good at patterns, we're really good at balance, we're really good at like detecting like whether or not lines are straight against other lines, that kind of pattern relationship. We're super great at that. What that means in rhythmic terms is that we can very easily tell when there is a rhythm, and we can super duper tell when there's not a rhythm. We can get into it, and the second the flow just feels wrong, it's like really amazingly apparent. Even small, little, tiny problems, because just glare out, and we're just like, ugh. It's harder for us to know what the right answer is, for us to do it right the first time, but it is really easy for us to know when it's wrong. And this is handy because this means that when we're doing it and like we go through and we listen to every second of it, we can identify where it's wrong, and we know immediately where we need to change it. We don't know what the change is, but we know where the change has to be. In the beginning, when you're doing this, the change is probably everywhere. But if you just focus on each individual element of the first time you get hit by that, like, oh, and like you do that until you get one of those loops done, then you have a good groove. You have a groove that you're into, and then you clone it. Listen to it twice, find out which elements sound bad, repeat it like that, switch it out for something else, and then fix, repeat, and do all that over and over again, and then you got a drop, and you're good. That's almost entirely how everyone who's ever written this kind of music writes this kind of music. Very few people come in here with like a set plan for what they're going to do, and if they do, it's usually because it's a genre of music that's way simpler than this, or they happen to be ridiculous geniuses. Most people are not. So don't feel discouraged by the fact that you always feel like you're lost when you start these drops. Everyone does. And then, yeah, so that's sort of how I wrote the drops. That's kind of how I write every drop, unless I have a plan, which is kind of rare. But yeah, everything else about this is pretty straightforward. This track is pretty kick-ass. It has a lot of the sound design that I'm the most proud of in the EP. Second, perhaps, to What's Going On in Forever, which is next after we're done with parts 2 and 3 of the making of Ammunition. Oh man, naming this track also, like, it was hard. Naming things is awful. Let's leave it at that. Anyway, if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And also don't forget that you can actually buy this FLP if you want to pick it up from the Fix Store. You go to fixstore.com/SeamlessR, and you can pick up the deluxe version of the EP, and you can actually get individual projects. You don't have to get the whole thing at once, but if you do, there is a discount. and all that stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.